The virtual campground is a community of RVers. We gather around the campfire to share stories, information, and travel tips to help you on your next adventure. Welcome to the virtual campground. We are so glad you are here. Today we're going to talk about the Bourbon Trail.
We're going to talk about Kentucky.
Which
includes the Bourbon Trail. There's plenty to do in Kentucky without having to ever have a drop of bourbon. We're not sure why you would do that, but you certainly can.
That's right.
So when we say Kentucky, we really just today mean Lousiville and Lexington, that area, because we didn't explore much more out of that area.
Yeah, Louisville, Lexington, Frankfort, and those surrounding little towns.
Though I would recommend, even for folks that aren't drinkers, to go to one of the distilleries and take a tour, because it's just kind of fascinating to see what has truly made this area so unique is the bourbon industry in a large part. It plays a huge part in their history.
Yeah, and it was really popular, and then it died off, and then it became really popular again.
Yes. Now, when is the best time to go to Kentucky?
They do get weather here, like any place. We were there in springish.
Yeah, so we were there. We were there basically in April, and April's a pretty good time to go. But I will say, you know how every state says if you don't like the weather, wait a few minutes. Kentucky might actually be right. So probably the best time to be there is in spring and in fall, because the summer does get warm and the winters do get snow. And then the kickoff for Derby weekend is about 2 weeks before the Derby, and then of course the Derby is the first weekend of the May. But there's also horse racing in the fall.
The Derby week or 2 weeks leading up to the Derby had a lot of activities going on. So once we got to know what was happening, it was kind of fun, and we went downtown for some fireworks.
So let's just focus right now on Louisville. You already mentioned the fireworks that we saw at Thunder. 2 weeks before the Derby, they kicked it off. It was like an all-day event with a festival, and then end it with these fireworks.
And the fireworks are incredible.
It is by far the most incredible fireworks show I'd ever seen in my entire life.
It went on forever.
I would say it was worth going just for fireworks if you're a fireworks person.
If you do go to that, though, be prepared. There were thousands, tens of thousands of people down there.
So the other great thing that you can do in Lousiville, Churchill Downs. So we did not make it to Churchill Downs for the actual Derby. That ticket price was a little above our pay grade, but we did go out there for the tour. The tour itself of seeing Churchill Downs, it was nice. It was good to see it because so historical and this beautiful old building with the spires. But they also had a really fascinating museum. I thought this was like a surround sound film that kind of gave you a little bit of 360 information about the Derby, and then they just had so much memorabilia on display that has to do with the parades and of course the horses and the jockeys, and there was one whole section that was dedicated to Bobby something. Very short man. So Churchill Downs is a great tour to go take. There's also Louisville Slugger Museum, which you've done, and that was fun.
Many years ago,
There's also a museum, of course, dedicated to bourbon called the Fraser Museum. The great thing is if you want to do the Louisville Bourbon Trail, you can start there and walk down Main Street, and you will hit 4 of the distilleries right there. Right down the street from the Fraser is Michter Distillery, which we did go up to their bar area. It was a very nice bar, the Nelson Bar. We did a little flight and tried their old fashioned.
And that was interesting because you walk into the shop, really, and then you say, we want to go to the bar. Well, then you kind of have to wait, and they escort you upstairs. But it was a really nice bar.
There's also down the street from that is the Evan Wiliams, which I did that tour. Now that tour is really a good tour, especially if you have kids along, I would say, because it's very interactive and historical. You go into a room and you watch a little film, and then you walk through this area, and it's like the film is following you and you're in the colonial times. So from that perspective, it's an interesting tour. One tour that we did do, Old Forester.
That was a nice tour.
That was a really good tour. That picture is me charring a barrel.
Yeah, you got to push the button to start the fire to char a barrel. That was pretty cool.
I was pretty impressed with myself.
I mean, look at you pushing that button.
So hard to push a button.
And there the flames.
Yes.
I also thought this was interesting in that this tour walked you through building one of these kegs so that you could see the cooper. Yeah, you saw the cooperage process, which I thought was pretty fascinating.
And then you'd walk a little bit further down, you can get to Angel's Envy. It's a little bit more modern. A good tour. It's a solid tour.
It was a fine tour.
I think if you were going to have to take your pick, you might do a different one.
Yeah.
And then another one is
Copper and Kings.
Yes, Copper and Kings was really fun.
One of the unique things about this tour was you ended up, after you did your tasting, then if you decided you wanted to purchase something, then you had the option to go to the barrels they had ready to pour, and you poured your own bottle.
And then my favorite was Rabbit Hole. It was really a fun tour. It's all in this one building, 3 or 4 stories tall. They take you through the whole process, but they're a much more digital kind of process. The tour guide was great. So one of the things you can also get at any of the distilleries really is the field guide, which has listed in it all of the distilleries, and it became my personal mission to like get my stamp for almost every one of them.
So that's your passport book.
Yeah, this is a passport book, and I'm a finisher completer when it comes to passports. One distillery, very popular distillery, Buffalo Trace, is not a member, so they are not in here. They chose not to do this and to put the money more into their tours, and they have probably the most popular tours. They're really hard to get into, but they also are free. Whereas everybody else, there is a fee for their tours.
But the book was nice in that it gave you some
detail.
detail.
Yeah, it gave you information about, tell you whether there was food there or not. And it gave you a place to write a note and remember what date you went there. The other thing I wanted to mention was a book that we were reading. It's called A History of American Spirit by Dane Hucklebridge. It's not just about Kentucky, but it is about bourbon and sort of the impact of American spirit, whiskey, and bourbon on the history of the United States. Like the American Revolution had a lot more to do with bourbon and whiskey than it did tea. But I think that was really interesting. And while also in Louisville, we did eat there quite often.
Yes.
And there were some great places to eat. We enjoyed the Fat Lamb.
The Fat Lamb, yeah.
That was down in this area by the cemetery you can go through that has Colonel Sanders and Muhammad Ali and many other dignitaries. Cave Hill Cemetery. On Main Street, there is Doc Crow's, which was really popular. It had some great food, a lot of history. And then, of course, Doc Crow was one of the founders of the bourbon industry there. Around the corner from that was a really fun little pub that we found called The Troll Under the Bridge. Yeah. And it had a huge statue of a troll. We had a hot brown.
Hot brown.
So a hot brown is something that you're supposed to have when you go to Kentucky. It's a dish that was actually created at the Brown Hotel. The irony is it is hot, but it is not brown.
Not brown.
No, because it's an open-faced sandwich, and you think it's going to have gravy, but it's really cheese. It's a Mornay sauce, which is a cheese sauce. The chef at Brown Hotel had created it basically from stuff he had on hand when some people came in hungry. We did try it at the Troll, but we would probably recommend that you go try it at the Brown Hotel. We also went out to 4th Street, and apparently this is supposed to be a really popular area, but it was not very happening.
No, it looked like it had the potential to be happening, but I don't know if we caught it on an off night.
It was very strange, and a lot of the restaurants were closed down. So people might tell you about 4th Street and maybe go by and see if it's gotten better, but while we were there, I wouldn't recommend that it is an area to go to. And of course, I can't not mention a bookstore.
Of course not.
Carmichael's. One of the things I liked about it was there was another kind of room behind, because it's in an old house, that was filled with really fun gift items. Yeah. So when we were in the Louisville area, we stayed out in Shelbyville. Yep. It's a cute little historic small town. There you also can do a couple of distilleries. There was the Bullet and Jephthah. And you had a really fun experience at Bullet.
They had the tasting there with the scent balls. Right. Yeah, so that was fun.
And Jephthah was a family distillery that I visited one day just to go see it. That was a fun experience. They had a big bar area and then a place where you could do the tasting. I can highly recommend that you can stop off there. It's really a quick stop. The other thing we did in Shelbyville was Mrs. Sanders, Colonel Sanders' wife, had her own dining house. It is more
Southern,
family
Midwestern family style. The only part that was open when we went was this huge banquet hall almost type room, and you got in line for the buffet and Some of the food I didn't recognize.
And
but it was
ironically, it was not fried chicken. We were there on a Sunday. So other than Sundays, they have menus. That was just the Sunday buffet. So we move on to Lexington?
Yes, we spent a good time in Lexington, darn it. But we drank a lot of bourbon. I don't know if you figured that out.
No.
One of the things that we did there that was fun was we went to Bourbon on Rye and had a really good old-fashioned there.
Yeah, but we went to Horse and Jockey and had a better one.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
I would also tell you in Lexington there is a bookstore called the Joseph Beth Bookstore. It was the largest independent bookstore I think I've ever been in. It was 2 stories, really wide, big, and then it had a bistro in it as well.
The thing that I thought was interesting about this area was we went to Keeneland, which was a really cool racetrack,
Yes.
and I liked it more than Churchill Downs. Churchill Downs has a ton of history, of course, but Keeneland just has a really nice feel to it.
It's more brick than wood, and it was just really very pretty, and that's where we went and watched the Derby. We also were there one day when they were actually doing racing at Keeneland, and the neat thing about it was you could really get pretty much right up to the track, and also before you enter the racetrack there's this whole section where the horses are paraded out there before the race, so you could have a chance to look at them, I guess, before you place your bet. And you still had some of the fashion and some of the things going on, but it's also a little bit more casual of an atmosphere as well. And so we highly recommend going out to Keeneland. We did have a kind of interesting thing that we learned. So we tried to find out if you could take your rig out there.
Oh, yeah.
And we were told when we called, they didn't think so. And we couldn't ever get anybody to really confirm it, so we did not take our rig out there. But when we went out there for Derby Day, there was a section area where some friends were there with their rig.
Yeah,
and they had spent the night.
Yeah.
So I think it is an area they allow this, down where the buses are parked and stuff. But it was pretty limited space. Not far from there is also some huge castle this man had built. And it's now been renovated to be a restaurant. So that's an interesting thing if you want to stop by. It's right outside there. And then the other thing we really enjoyed in Lexington is we went to the Burl. And we saw a live concert.
Yeah, the Burl, it was a really small venue, and we saw Cody Canada and The Departed, and really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, and sometimes they're out in the open, sometimes they're in that building we're in, but the Burl, I know, does do a lot of the entertainment for Keeneland. So check out the Burl if you are a person that likes live music. Also near Lexington, and where we stayed when we were near Lexington, was Georgetown. And in Georgetown, if you like history, there's a really beautiful Ward Hall, the historic Ward Hall. This is a house that is from the mid-1800s and was owned by a family that then lost it during the Civil War, but now is run by this charitable foundation who are very lovingly restoring it. The very dedicated volunteers were so sweet and take such real pride in this. It's only open on certain days, so you want to check them, but it's a great little day trip. So again, this is an area of Lexington where Mary Todd Lincoln is. You can go explore her home, and just in case you're not into bourbon, we did enjoy a couple of breweries in that area as well.
Yeah, one was Country Boy Brewing. I think that
the
was
largest thing I've ever seen.
Our waitress was very pleasant.
Oh, she
we
was
had a
the
great
sweetest
time.
girl.
And good beer.
Yes, and then there's also a place called Salanta Public House. Some great farms in the area that I saw signs that said fresh produce, so that's something to go by and see. And we didn't do this, but I also have heard it's a really nice day if you're a person that really loves horses. There is the Kentucky Horse Farm out there. So the other area is Frankfort.
Frankfort, yes.
The capital of Kentucky.
We had heard about this clock, pretty large floral clock. It was lovely. And of course, no stop in Frankfort is complete without going to
the Rebecca
Ruth Chocolates. A couple of ladies back in 1919 started a chocolate shop.
They were substitute teachers that decided education wasn't really their bag.
As you go around Kentucky, you'll hear reference to bourbon balls, and anytime you get a chance to have a bourbon ball, have one.
Any distillery you go to, you'll find a bourbon ball made with their bourbon. Go to the house. She has a couple of locations, but this was the original in this house in Frankfort. And the great thing was you can go in there and you can fill up a box of chocolates, but as you're filling the box, you'll be like, well, I just don't know what a bourbon toffee tastes like, and they'll give you a sample. And then we left there and went to the Goodwood Brewery, which is around the corner. Mm-hmm. And that was a great place to eat, as well as a nice little brewery. And then there was another brewery not far from where we were staying in Frankfort, which was West Sixth Farm. And that was fun because it was out on a farm. And it had trails and biking trails. They don't really do food, but they had a food truck there. But in that area, as far as distilleries, we did do a few distilleries. Really popular, Buffalo Trace. Now, here's a hint. Buffalo Trace, they apparently don't put their tours up because they're so popular. They don't put them up until the first day of the month before. The other thing is, if you go in the morning during the week, they'll probably be able to fit you in to their schedule. So if you don't get a tour and you want to go see it, do that. It's a pretty good tour. It's a great shop for items, and Buffalo Trace is very popular at bourbon. If one of their many brands is your favorite, then that's definitely some place to go. Four Roses was another place that we went to in that area.
And it was really nice property.
Probably a good tour, but we didn't get to do the tour.
We just sat down for a tasting.
And the lady was really good at explaining how to do the tasting. And then Castle and Key.
Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
This was the most impressive grounds.
Yeah, and great history.
It was an interesting tour because it was so historical.
This is a great place just to go hang out. There were a lot of people just milling about and having a good old time. Highly recommend you going by Castle and Key.
And then the other beautiful one was Woodford. We did enjoy one event and one tasting. This event was part of Derby festivities that we went there, and this special bottle she's holding up was their Derby edition, because of course Woodford is the official bourbon of the Derby. So they get to do a special bottle, so you could buy a bottle and then they would sign it for you. Yeah. And then it was just a lovely day out on their patio and with a couple of drinks, and you got to keep the little gold cup. The grounds of Woodford are quite pretty, and I've heard good things about their tours. From a perspective of if you're in this area where you should go to eat, there is a restaurant not far from there called The Stave. I highly recommend this. I do think you should make a reservation. Really great food, so we would highly recommend that. And then to wrap up the distilleries, we went into Bardstown, which Bardstown is the place that I think most people, when they think about Bourbon Trail, it's kind of the seat of the Bourbon Trail. Cute little downtown area that you can walk around. This is the Bardstown Bourbon Company. They had a very modern restaurant. We tried their bourbon and we weren't terribly impressed. But by that point, maybe too many. But we also went in that area to Heaven Hill. We got to taste multiple brands there. They had and that was one of your favorites because of Elijah
Craig.
And then we did a fun thing while we were in Bardstown and went to a really small distillery called Preservation.
Very crafty.
Yeah,
very small.
Because it's very small. They're still, in fact, right now they're mostly selling other people's bourbons as they're making their own. That was a really good tour, I thought, just from that perspective of, as you're thinking about doing tours, and if you want to keep a limit, do one like this that's the really small, family-oriented, and then maybe do one that's one of the larger ones.
You really get to see both sides the large production and tiny production. Yeah.
And we went from Preservation, so this small, kind of rustic, to Willet, which is very slick.
And you have to have a reservation.
It was a lovely ground. It smelled so good, the rick houses. You could smell the brandy coming off of it. But the piece de resistance at Willet is not the bourbon. It's the egg salad sandwich,
which has its own Instagram page. This was just crazy. We thought they were nuts, but it was really good.
It's like that shaved egg yolk at the top.
Yeah,
it was a very, I will give them. It was the best tasting egg salad I've ever had.
I mean, you don't expect much from egg salad,
no,
really,
you
but
don't.
This blew everything else away.
It really kind of did. Yeah. So
well, it was a nice little visit.
That is pretty much the basics of what we did. We would recommend, again, day trips. Go out to Mammoth National Park. If you want to go north, there's this thing called the Noah's Ark, where a man has built literally
it's amazing
an ark that is as big as Noah's Ark. If you can go south, there's a little town called Berea. Very cute. Lots of craft and arts and crafts kind of things. That's a lot, but next time. But there is a lot there to do and see. But I would recommend to people to check on the festivals and activities going on, because I think they have a lot of activities and festivals there. There's, of course, a bourbon festival, and I don't think there's an egg salad sandwich festival, but probably a festival for just about everything. And then check at the Burl for who's playing, because they get some big names there. And also, we would say to indulge. So you can do a distillery tour. Most of them are going to charge.
Yeah.
But then they will have other activities that are maybe not just your basic go on a tour of the distillery. Like one was a chocolate tasting with bourbon. But one that we did at Jim Beam.
One of our favorite experiences
Absolutely.
of the whole thing.
So it was a food and bourbon tasting. So they have
pairing.
They have a restaurant there. And so the idea was that we were going to get to have these 4 Basil Hayden bourbons. Each one of them would be paired with a food that the chef had prepared especially for this tasting. We had a very unique experience when we did this in that normally this is for 12 people. We were the only 2 people there.
Yeah.
So we ended up with a private.
Well, the chef
tasting.
came out and he was like,
"Well,
what do you want to do?" And we were like, "Well, you tell us what you want to do." And so he brought out the menu and he said, we asked him what he would recommend. And he said, "Well, I would recommend this, this, and this." And he said, "Okay, let's do it." It turns out he just brought us one of everything.
Not necessarily everything. One of every appetizer and one of every dessert. But we had one salad and one food item, an entree, crazy. Which was very large.
We waddled out of there.
Yes, we did.
Incredible.
That was an indulgence that we decided to spend the money on, and look how well that turned out for us. But even if it had only been the real way that they do it, which is just a tasting, it still would have been so special. Yeah, very, very nice. So look and see what special events that they do for the folks that are coming to visit them and try something like that. You also have to try, we've already talked to you, you have to get a hot brown. Mm-hmm. You have to have a bourbon ball.
Yep.
You have to try what is known unofficially as Derby pie, but officially most people will call it on their menu like a brownie walnut pie because there's only one bakery in town that's allowed to call it a Derby pie.
Yep.
And burgoo, which is some sort of stew-like vegetable thing.
Don't call it chili.
Yeah, it's special Kentucky, and it was tasty.
Yeah,
those would be things that we recommend. Then as far as where we stayed, first we stayed at Whispering Hills in Georgetown. Mm-hmm. And I think Georgetown, from a perspective of getting around to all the places,
it was sort of in between.
Sort of. It's a lot closer to Lexington than Louisville, but it ends up that a lot of the Bourbon Trail is Bardstown. The only part you would be missing and be farther from is in Louisville, because it was about a little over an hour to Louisville from Georgetown. We also stayed in Shelbyville at Lake Shelby County Park.
Yeah, that was interesting.
So this looks like a really great spot because we're kind of out there by ourselves. And it was that spot. Yeah. It is the number 1 spot out of 12. It is the only one full hookups. The other 11 spots are down a row to the side of that green building, and they're pretty close together.
Yeah, it's small and a little weird and lots of geese.
Oh, so many geese. And then the third place we stayed was Kentucky River Campground, which was right outside of Frankfort. That was fascinating and different because it was almost all seasonal people.
Yeah, they all knew each other. It was just kind of a party atmosphere.
They park their rigs there for the whole summer and just come in on the weekends. So during the week it was empty, but the weekends were busy.
A lot of fun. I mean, you could tell they really enjoyed being around each other, but it just didn't work out great for us.
Really tight spaces. And then the other bad part about that was it was down in a valley and we really didn't have Wi-Fi.
No.
It was a great location.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I would recommend that one for most RVers. So I'd say overall our favorite was Georgetown, Whispering Hills.
Well, that's our wrap up of the Kentucky Bourbon Trail and other things to do in that area. We hope this has been helpful. Thanks for
Let us know if you have any questions.
Yeah, if you have
happy to help.
If something we've missed, please leave it in the comments because we will be back in the area. So thanks for being here. Until we get to see you in person one day, hope to see you in the virtual campground.
Bye-bye.